Hey guys, this is part two of the U.S. Constitution Unit notes. And really, we talked about more of the history in part one and the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist debate and a lot of the processes that went into designing that Constitution and a lot of the debates that were kind of talked about during the design of that Constitution. Today is more about what the Constitution actually looks like, how it's structured. If you want to think of the Constitution like a chapter book, each chapter is called an article and then a number. So think of each article like a chapter of this new book called the Constitution. Don't confuse the Articles of the Constitution with the Articles of Confederation because they are easily confusable simply because it has the word articles in it. But Articles of the Constitution simply means like the chapters of the Constitution, whereas the Articles of the Confederation is more about the whole different government that existed before the Constitution. Okay, so in the very beginning, you have the preamble. Okay, that is an introduction to the Constitution, and that's probably the preamble to the Constitution is the one you're familiar with. You probably learned it in like fourth or fifth grade, and it starts off with "We the people, in order to form more perfect union, to establish justice, to ensure domestic tranquility," all that stuff. It's basically a little paragraph that explains why the Constitution was written. Okay, it says the government's power comes from the people, we the people, right? And then it states the purposes of government, all right, to establish justice, to ensure domestic tranquility. Several of those little pieces are built into that short little introduction to the document, and we call that the preamble. Okay. Article 1 is the legislative branch. So Chapter 1 of the Constitution is all about the branch of government which a lot of the founders deemed the most important because it's the one that makes the laws, the one that's going to actually design the laws for the land. Okay, and on the right here, you have a picture of the Capitol building, the Senate on the left, the House of Representatives on the right. But the legislative branch, the whole structure of it was hashed out during the Constitutional Convention. We had the Great Compromise, which really established a bicameral legislature, okay, with both chambers there to make the laws. All right, they both have the responsibility of making the laws. So if it passes one chamber, it has to go to the other chamber, and we'll learn about that when we come back to school, January 25th. We'll start learning about the legislative branch. Okay, but it discusses in this chapter. It's the longest one because I think really the founders saw this as the most important branch and probably the most representative of the people. So they really wanted to get this branch right, but they wanted to make sure that that branch had powers to actually exercise and create different types of laws, but also had limits on things it couldn't do. So you have, like, if you look in the Constitution, you have Article 1, Section 8 are all the powers of Congress. Then Article 1, Section 9 is all the powers Congress doesn't have, what the things it can't do. Okay. So some of the powers include collecting taxes, declaring war, regulating trade between the states and also between the United States and other countries. Okay. Limitations. One of the few things that the delegates really agreed on was that they didn't want the national government to be able to tax exports. So if you're a business and you want to sell your goods in another country, the government should not be able to tax you for doing that. And that was really the wish of a lot of different businessmen and agriculture farmers who wanted to sell their goods abroad to France or Britain or wherever. Okay, so those are some of the powers of the legislative branch and some of the limitations of the legislative branch. Article 2 is all about the executive branch, this newly formed executive branch, all right? And they are responsible for carrying out and enforcing the laws. Different than the legislative branch, which was involved in making the laws. Executive branch enforces the laws. And this really discusses the roles and powers of this newly created position that we're going to call President of the United States. All right. And his job is really to be the commander of the armed forces, to appoint certain government officials, and to really oversee the process of law enforcement and the carrying out of laws. The executive branch nowadays is the largest branch of government in terms of the number of people who actually work in it. You have all these different cabinet departments, the Department of Treasury, the Department of Interior, the Department of Transportation, Department of Communications, the Department of Labor, all these different branches, all these different cabinet departments that really have thousands of people that go out and enforce these laws and regulations that the national government makes. Okay, so Article 2 is the executive branch. Article 1, legislative branch. Article 2, executive branch. Article 3 is the judicial branch, which is also a newly formed national branch, because during the Articles of Confederation, remember, we only had one branch, and that was the legislative branch. So the judicial branch is going to be the one that calls for one Supreme Court to rule over all the other courts in the land. So this is the highest court in the land, and it's now obviously in D.C., but this branch is responsible for interpreting the laws that are made by the legislative branch. So the ones that are determining how to punish those who violate national laws and federal laws, and also potentially if some laws do conflict with, like some state laws might conflict with federal laws, they're going to be the ones who step in and kind of determine which law is supreme. And really, it's the federal law every time. But also, when the national government makes a law that might potentially violate a certain section of the Constitution, it's the court's job to step in and say something about it. Okay. And then obviously to resolve disputes between states as well. This is going to be really important for that purpose. Okay. Article 4, the fourth chapter. So really the first three are all about the three branches. Article 4, so IV and Roman numerals, is all about how the states will relate to one another, okay? Because they have this newly formed national government that's going to be pretty powerful. So how does that change the relationship between the states? All right. So it explains the relationship to the states of one another and to the national government. And it really, the biggest and most important thing about this chapter is that it says that all states must respect other states' laws, court decisions, and records. Okay. So if you are legally married in one state and you move to another state, that state has to recognize your legal marriage because you have to respect other states' laws. That's just an example of how that would potentially work. Okay. And then there is a guarantee in this chapter that all states will be protected by the national government. So it's basically a common defense guarantee. Hey, if one state gets attacked, national government's going to be there for you. Okay. Article 5 is all about the amendment process. How do we go about changing the Constitution? Okay. And that process involves proposal. So there has to be a process on how an amendment even gets proposed to the Constitution. And then there is a process for how an amendment actually gets added on to the Constitution. So really, it's a pretty short chapter, but it explains how you go about changing the Constitution. And really, up to date, there's only been 27 changes to the Constitution so far. Article 6 is the one with the supremacy clause, which you guys have heard about earlier. It says the Constitution and the laws passed by Congress are the supreme law of the land. Okay, so it established that this newly formed national government, it's going to be supreme. So state governments really have to submit at least a decent amount of authority to this newly formed national government. Federal laws are always going to be over state laws. Federal laws are always going to be supreme over state laws. That's national supremacy. And then the last chapter, Article 7, is about how this Constitution, how this Constitution would take effect after it was approved by 9 states or ratified by 9 states. Okay, so they had to have a short little explanation there about when the document would actually take effect, when the national government would actually be in power. Yep, and then the amendments are all the way at the end of the document. There's 27 of them. The most recent one, I think, being passed in 1992. But really, the first 10, which we call the Bill of Rights, were passed really in the 2 years right after the Constitution was approved. Remember, that was the efforts of the Anti-Federalists because they said, we want a Bill of Rights added onto the Constitution because we want to guarantee that the federal government can't take away certain rights. Okay, so these are the ones that protect individual freedoms in those first 10 amendments, which we'll learn about this week. All right. That's it for today, guys. That's the structure. Those are the 7 chapters. The amendments are at the end. Hopefully you guys learned something today.